Alrighty, here we are. Lawyer Talk Off the Record. They don't teach you that in law school series here with our resident law students. We have Bella and we have Troy. The idea of this is to take on questions and take on topics that you guys are interested in and then talk about them in such a way that maybe everybody else gets a little bit of an understanding, because they don't teach you everything in law school. They really teach you what questions to ask. Mm-hmm. They give you a foundation to figure stuff out. And that's what we're doing here. We're taking it into the real world, not only the real world out there, but the real world in our law practice. By the way, if you've got a topic you want us to cover, you can check us out, lawyertalkpodcast.com, or you can check us out on YouTube, Facebook, I think, or wherever you get your socials. Not TikTok yet, apparently.
We're still good now. It's back.
Oh, TikTok's back. Okay.
Yeah.
It shows you what I know.
For 90 days.
For at least 90 days more. But check us out in the socials. Leave us a comment, suggest a topic, and we'll do our best. Or if you've got some follow-up to what we've talked about here, then feel free to offer your input. I'm happy to listen to it, and I'm happy to respond. And if it's good enough, if you think you got the chops to send it to the table here, we'll kick it around here. But anyway, we had a question, guys, and I'm sort of usurping us. I'm asking a question today, or I'm bringing a topic today. But we talked about this a little bit off the air. And it involved a question we got from one of our other Q&As in the podcast series about whether the guy was actually asking whether it was okay to ask the police for the cop's identification during a stop. And we all sort of thought, well, that's not that. We were assuming he was asking, do we as citizens have to give our ID to the police, or do we have to identify ourselves? And I've been asked this question a lot, and it has to do with a policy. There's the famous policy of stop, frisk, and identify, or stop, identify, and frisk, or stop and frisk, whatever. So I want to ask you guys, what have they taught you about this? Have you had criminal procedure yet?
So I'm in criminal procedure right now.
And I got to take it next semester, third year.
Well, what do you guys think? How does this work?
Who'd you have for legal writing research?
Goldson, I was with you. Yeah, we did. I feel like I should be an expert at this because we did this like the whole first year in legal writing, but I don't know. I feel like
we didn't learn about it in crim, which I thought was kind of interesting.
In criminal law.
In criminal law, yeah.
Well, we should talk about that, because criminal law is in law school they teach you two different things involving criminal stuff.
Yeah.
The first is called criminal law, and that's more substantive criminal law, meaning what is a crime? What's the elements of a crime? How do you define a crime? Mm-hmm. And what are the defenses? It doesn't go into actually what happens in a courtroom.
No.
And then you have criminal procedure, which is exactly that, what happens in a courtroom. But even that should be broken down into two sections, and I don't think they teach in law school like the Ohio rules of criminal procedure at all. But the criminal procedure is more the constitutional stuff. As a good friend of mine once said, it's what the bastards can't do to you. It's like what your rights are, what your protections are against the governmental prosecutions. So meaning the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, even the Eighth Amendment, these constitutional protections we have. And then you have like the other side, the nuts and bolts criminal procedure. What's an arraignment? What happens in an arraignment? What's a preliminary hearing? What are pretrials? Those are things. What are discovery rules? Those are things that are more nuts and bolts written in local rules.
Mm-hmm. And whenever we were in legal writing research, obviously Terry v. Ohio brought up like kind of this gray area of where cops can just stop and ID you and frisk you. Like it basically created this big what if gap. Like it depends, as we always say. Like that's how I interpret it. So there's like now it gave more power to the police pretty much to just stop and ask us IDs. That's how I viewed it. I don't know if that's like I don't know how you got from class.
Yeah, I think they just needed like some type of reasonable suspicion.
Mm. What's reasonable suspicion?
Like almost like probable cause.
Almost like probable cause. So this is great stuff. You guys haven't had criminal procedure yet, so you don't know this stuff. But it's these are hard topics to really kick around. But we've talked about before this notion of statutory law, things that are written down in the books, like the Ohio Revised Code or your state's revised code. And then you have constitutional provisions or standards. And what the U.S. Supreme Court's job since Marbury versus Madison anyway is to balance or compare one to the other. So if a criminal statute violates a constitutional provision, then they can strike down that statute and it's unconstitutional. But the criminal statute, if it's not consistent or gives more guidance or maybe broadens your constitutional rights, it can do that. It just can't go too far to limit constitutional rights beyond what the Constitution would say. And both those things are at play here with this topic, because there are states that have implemented policies and even written laws on stop and frisk or stop and identify. And they ultimately get measured by a standard, like you said, Troy, under Terry versus Ohio. One thing you'll note, anybody who is a scholar of criminal procedure, it seems like there's an inordinate number of cases coming out of Ohio. So it's like Ohio makes it big again in not such a good way. And there are usually things like there's First Amendment cases that came out of Ohio, Brandenburg versus Ohio. Then you got Terry versus Ohio. You've got Berkemer versus McCarty, another case that came out of Ohio involving traffic stops and clients or a defendant's Fifth Amendment rights after a traffic stop. There's just a bunch of them.
It's Ohio against the world.
It's Ohio versus the world. That's right. I like to take these topics and sort of turn them into the real world experiences that we have lived. Now, you guys may be a little young to remember Rudy Giuliani and the New York scenario. Is any of that ringing a bell?
He's the guy that had like the hair product like steaming down of him when he was sweating, right? Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He's Rudy is now known for with his association with Donald Trump. But, back in the good old days, he was an assistant United States attorney, I think, and eventually became elected to the United States Attorney's Office out in New York, and was one of the guys credited with bringing down the mafia. And then he was eventually elected as mayor of New York. New York back in the 70s, I remember going there as a kid and with my dad, but I don't remember much, but I remember sort of the hucksters on the road, on the corners, playing 3-card Monte and the shell game and all that stuff. And I remember just my dad saying, "Stay close to me" as we walked through New York City. I mean, it was a dangerous place to walk. They had things like, you guys ever had your windows, like the window wipers?
Like somebody come up and try and clean my window?
Yeah.
I haven't.
No, I haven't.
All right. Well, that was a pretty, it's sort of intimidating. You're at a traffic stop and these guys come up and they start washing your windows with a squeegee.
And they want money. Right?
They want money. Yeah.
I've had somebody come up with CDs and be like, "Yo, man, here's my mixtape." I'm like, "Oh, cool, thanks, man." They're like, "All right, well, are you gonna give me something for giving me your CD?" I'm like, "No."
How do I know if it's good?
Yeah. So here's your CD.
But it's sort of scary, and a lot of crime resulted from that. I was in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I was with my family years ago, and somebody wanted to come up. I somehow got lost or wherever I was, but somebody was coming up to my window, and I was at a red light. I just took off. I'm like, "Listen, I'm not going to participate in this nonsense." But it was an intimidating thing. You'd go through Grand Central Station, and it was like prostitution, homelessness, drug trades. You go to the subways; it's covered with graffiti. It was just a mess. So early on, somebody, I think a journalist, came up with this notion of the broken window approach to crime. Any guesses?
I'll make it sound like we didn't talk about this a little bit earlier.
I already explained it.
But it was like, we should call the police for every minor issue. So then that way it kind of trickles up, if that's right. Like it'll just start addressing the bigger issues too. Like we can't just let any minor crime go by, because then we're not going to let anything go by. Yeah.
The idea is that it's like tip of the iceberg stuff. So if you have no law and order, if you have no control over even the little things, then the other stuff is just immediately becomes out of control. And, later on, I guess there was a study this is highly criticized because it worked, right? It worked. The broken window theory. If there's a broken glass, you call the police, you address it immediately. If somebody's caught loitering or doing whatever minor crime, littering even, call the cops, address it. Somebody gets caught graffiti on the subway, you call the cops, you address it, and you charge these people and you arrest these people. Well, quickly it sort of becomes overwhelming for the police. It became a little bit overwhelming for the courts. I guess there were even some public courts created to deal with this kind of stuff, but it worked, or at least crime drops. Now, some on the political divide might say that was because generally, as a country in the 80s, economically, the rising tide sort of raised all the boats. Everybody did better in the 80s, so economically people were better, so that automatically sent crime down, and they would discount the effectiveness of the broken window policies. And the problem with this. And there's even quotes about this, because you can imagine where the police would, and this also created some neighborhood policing, like ideas of cops just on the streets. And, they went to the poor neighborhoods. They went to the black neighborhoods. They went to the neighborhoods where the crime was. And the criticism was it had racist, desperate outcomes. So more black folks, minority folks, Hispanic folks were charged with crimes as a result of these policies. And, on the one side, they would say that is targeting minorities. On the other side, they say, well, we're going where the crime is. It's just a fact, and it's sad, but it's true. And maybe both became, as you look back, there were instances of bad cops using these, using this for racist reasons, or at least it looks that way.
I feel like I could entertain that it was a little bit of both, I imagine. I mean, there's not every cop out there is perfect, but I imagine most of them are trying to just do their job.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I don't know. But the broken window, it makes sense to me. I mean, I don't know.
Well, there was a study later, like like in the last 10 years, maybe. So I think somebody overseas, maybe Denmark, Finland, or something. I read an article earlier, and this is sort of fascinating to me. They created a mailbox, and in the mailbox they had an envelope, and in an envelope was €5 or something, money. And they watched. The mailbox was open with the envelope, and they monitored normal folks as they walked by, and they counted how many people actually took the money versus looked at it and put it back. They did it, two controls. One of them had a mailbox that was covered in graffiti and a bunch of junk in it, and another was a very clean, neat-looking mailbox with nothing else in it. And the mailbox with a bunch of junk in it covered in graffiti, it was overwhelmingly more people stole the money or took the money than the opposite. So the idea is that if things are orderly, you're less likely to engage in criminal behavior, or at least questionable behavior. I don't know if that's a parallel.
So, like,
criminologist and sociologist, that's beyond my realm.
Are mailboxes here just different? Because in my head, I can't look what's inside a mailbox. That's why,
I think they left it open.
Oh, okay. Because
Yeah.
in my head, I'm like, was everybody just opening their mailbox? I was like,
Yeah,
it sounds like crime.
It's like a candid camera thing where there's I saw on YouTube the other day, there was somebody had set something up where it looks like a kid had been kidnapped and swept into an alley, and they were monitoring how many people would stop and help, and it was something like that, I think.
Yeah.
A little bystander effect.
Yeah, bystanders. Yeah, and that's been sort of popular on YouTube and various places, but I think it's been overwhelmingly proven, or at least satisfied. I'm satisfied that it works. It community policing worked. It cleaned up New York. And like literally turned like Bryant Park and some other areas that I'm not really familiar with, but I've read about. It's like they went from like total mayhem to family places.
When you say community policing, are you saying like anybody on the street like me can like police it?
No, although that's an interesting question. See, when I was a kid back when this stuff was going on, and like when the streets were deemed unsafe, there was some of that going on. There was this group of dudes called the Guardian Angels. I'm serious. Google this. And these guys would walk around with little red beanies and their little uniforms, and they were like vigilante cops taking on, because the police weren't, like the government wasn't doing it. And so the Guardian Angels emerged, I think, in some of the bigger cities. Really sort of fascinating stuff.
I'm cool with that, but what happened in Florida, like maybe like 10 years ago? What was the case? Community watch guy shoots a kid.
Oh, yeah. You asked me too fast. But I know the case. Everybody knows the case.
Yeah.
Jose Lopez represented the guy, the lawyer down there.
Yeah, and it's just the problem I have is the whole community policing. Like, I would like it to be done, but it can't be done to like that extent. I'm like, you can't just
I mean, yes and no. But by the community policing I'm talking about is cops on the corner.
Okay.
Police on the street, a presence. And, this became sort of a policy and a practice where police would just hang out in the bad neighborhoods. And they even got to know the dope dealers on the corner, or they got to know who the criminals were, and almost like in a cat and mouse joking type of way. But their presence suppressed crime. So that's this idea of community policing. So it's going to be less likely somebody's going to throw a brick through a window if a cop's standing there. And if they're not going to do that, or if they're worried that a cop is going to come approach them, it's going to be less likely they've got a gun in their pocket, because they know the last time, or their buddy who was approached by a police officer got frisked and had a gun in his pocket. So now they're not going to do it. Like that's the theory. Well, back to New York, they created this idea that we're going to stop, frisk, and identify. All right, well, that sounds great. So you just go up to people, stop. But on the one hand, it sounds like, yeah, that would be very effective. On the other hand, I'm thinking like jackboots and brown shirts from Nazi Germany. You know, I've always said you can make these streets completely safe. If you want to eliminate all crime, it's really easy. You just flood the streets with cops and suspend your Fourth Amendment rights. There won't be any crime except for the government crime, right? Except for the corrupt police officers and the corrupt government. And that's the problem. There's all freedom comes with a price, and the price is safety. So if, we could all be perfectly safe if we give the government total control to stop this stuff by any means, martial law. Except we're not safe from the government actors. That's the problem. So somewhere in the middle is the balance, and that's why America is so unique. At any rate, the stop and frisk laws were all tested against the Fourth Amendment. And that is, as you brought up, Terry versus Ohio. So let's talk about Terry real quick. Terry says that the police can stop and detain a suspect if, do you remember the standard?
Reasonable suspicion standard?
A reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot. What the hell does that mean?
A crime is about to be committed, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's like this nebulous. It sounds awesome. So a lot of times, law like these standards are they're just designed to put a label on them, so then we can hash it out. I mean, I don't know.
I just view it as like they set the standard as low as possible, so then it kind of just like, well, the cops were meeting this bare minimum standard almost. Like
it's a lower standard than probable cause, right?
Right. So what you have on this continuum is you have something called reasonable. Say you have nothing, just a guess.
Mm-hmm. A hunch. An
inarticulate hunch is what is not reasonable suspicion. So sometimes we define stuff in the negative. So that's as low as it goes. You've got nothing. You're just pulling. I don't like the way Troy looks over there. I don't like that sweater.
My mom got for her Christmas.
Why don't you come here and wait right here, and you're not allowed to go anywhere until I do what I'm going to do, until I investigate you. All right, that's no suspicion. I don't like you, and that's what we're trying to protect against. That's the balance. Like, we don't want the police to have that, because the cop could be your sister's ex-husband and doesn't like you from some Thanksgiving fight you had, so now he's going to take advantage of it. I don't think that crap doesn't happen, because it can. Then you have something, the next notch on the pole would be reasonable suspicion. So you have to have some sort of reasonable and articulable suspicion. You have to point to certain facts that would justify your conclusion that criminal activity is afoot. A guy standing on a corner, pulling something out of his pocket, handing it to somebody else, taking money back, putting something in his pocket. I mean, that's sort of the classic reasonable suspicion. Like, yeah, look, I've been a cop for a decade. I've watched these streets. I've seen plenty of dope deals. That's a drug deal. Are you sure? No, I'm not positive, but I'm reasonably sure that that's a dope deal. And I can point to facts that would justify that. Then you have something called probable cause. And hold on. The continuum then is, because of reasonable suspicion, the police are allowed to conduct a limited detention. What the F is a detention? Well, I don't know. It's something less than an arrest, but more than nothing. So I've detained you, meaning you're not free to leave. And ironically, the arrest is sort of the same standard. You're not free to leave, but you guys figured it out. But a detention, a limited detention for purposes of investigating the criminal activity afoot. Sometimes that can sort of mushroom into a little bit more. So I have that reasonable suspicion. I see Bella making what I think is a dope deal. I say, halt! You don't go anywhere, young lady. You stay right there. That, any reasonable person in your shoes would think, I'm not free to leave. I better stay there. Now, of course, all the kids on the road are taken off, and then they give chase, and that causes all sorts of other issues. But say you stop, and now I as a police officer, approach, and I see what I think is the handle of a knife sticking out of your purse, or maybe on a bulge where somebody would normally have a sidearm, and I think, that looks an awful lot like a weapon. Now I might have reasonable suspicion based on those additional facts that I didn't first see, or maybe I did see a gun before and I didn't see you drop it. So now I have suspicion to not only detain you, but maybe conduct a limited pat down.
A frisk, right?
A frisk. I can frisk you.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's all sorts of rules about this. I mean, I can't look for an elephant in the shoebox. You know, I'm not allowed to.
You can only like grab and like squeeze, right? I know this is like not like anywhere, you know, but like
the grab and squeeze.
Right.
That they definitely did not teach you that in law school.
No.
So the grab and squeeze, but they can do a pat down. They find a gun, and now they have probable cause to arrest you. So reasonable suspicion is something less than probable cause, and warrants a detention that is something less than a full blown arrest. Probable cause is facts that any reasonable person would believe that a crime has been committed, and now you have probable cause. And again, that's a nebulous standard that's hard to delineate, but now you have probable cause, and I can conduct a full-blown arrest, or I can search things like your purse because I have probable cause to think that there might be something in a closed container. Why? Because I watched Bella stick a gun in her purse from across the street. That's more than a reasonable suspicion, and it's more like probable cause. And then you get to beyond that. Once you're arrested, you have these other things like proof beyond a reasonable doubt and other standards. But those are sort of the street standards of all this crap. So it gets really confusing. So say you have a law that says the police are allowed to stop and ask for identification any citizen they want. What say you guys to that?
Well, I feel like there still has to be some standard instead of them just coming up to anybody. If not, they just stop anywhere and be like, hey, you, and just get in a line. Everybody get in a line. I'm just going to ID everybody.
Right.
Like, there has to be some standard.
So you've got the law, the written law for, say, New York City or some other city. And then you've got the constitutional issues, like the Fourth Amendment as interpreted by Terry versus Ohio back in 1968, I believe.
Sounds right.
Sounds right. So the law, and then you got Terry and the Fourth Amendment. The law says I can stop, as a police officer, whoever I want. I can stop Bella whenever I want to and ask her for identification. What's the analysis? She's on the spot.
Wait, what was the question?
I'm a police officer, and the law says I can stop and ask you for identification.
Don't they have to have certain grounds to be able to pull you over?
Well, I'm not talking about car stop. You're walking on the street, but a car stop would be similar.
Well, then that's where the reasonable suspicion comes into play, right?
Yeah, I have to have some reasonable suspicion because the stop itself is a detention. It is saying you're not free to leave. I want to see your ID. So the first problem is the detention. The second problem is do you have to identify yourself? And you have to pass the Terry test first. And if you pass the Terry test, mostly the Supreme Court is saying that's okay. So there was a couple big cases on this. Terry obviously was one. Heibel versus the 6th Judicial District out of Nevada. That was in 2004. These are U.S. Supreme Court cases where they're quoting Terry and upholding the stop and identify statutes if they're applied in such a way that requires reasonable suspicion. But if they're applied in a way that does not require reasonable suspicion, now they've gone beyond the bounds of what the Fourth Amendment will permit.
I feel like a big problem I see with this ID issue and the reasonable suspicion is I see a lot of videos. I'm a full culprit to it, to like watching the YouTube and TikToks of like police interactions. Is a lot of times these people will get asked for their IDs, and then they'll turn and ask the cop like, "Why are you asking for my ID?" And the cop will be like, "Because I'm asking for it." Like they're not. It's almost like because I'm your dad, I'm your mom. Like you just gotta listen to me. It's like
right. This has caused. Look, these are power. These are power struggles. So if a cop comes up to me at random and says, "I want your ID," look, I don't like that. So, I don't like that. And I'm going to say no. And not just to be an asshole, but because I don't like it. I don't like it. And I'll give you an example. I was going into a courthouse. I'm not going to say where, but it's a courthouse. So you have a government actor. And I'm an attorney. I've been practicing law since 95. And the metal detector guy at the front of the courthouse door says, "How can I help you? What's your business here?" And I just stared at him. And he got pissed. And I'm just staring at him. And I wasn't in a great mood. I mean, the easy thing for me to do there would be like, oh, I got a case. It's up in Judge whatever, and I'm just going to go up there and whatever, and they'll look on the docket and say, okay, yeah, it's second floor. But that day I was just like, why the frick do you want to know that? Don't I pay for this courtroom or this courthouse? Isn't my tax dollar? I mean, so, I can understand on the one hand why they're asking because they're trying to keep everybody safe and secure. I can also understand from my perspective, it's like, it's none of your damn business, dude. Why you ask such a question? I'll put my stuff through your metal detector. I'm not carrying any guns, knives, or weapons. Let me in the damn door. This is public. I could say no to that. Or I could just look at him and not answer that question. And if I want to push that to its extreme, it's going to get really awkward. It's going to turn south. And then what happens is these videos you see on YouTube, right? These guys saying, why do you want to know? Because I can. Well, why can you? Like, I'm allowed to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I feel
it's
like
a
that just
standoff.
causes more issues.
I agree. I think they're just making it harder. At the end of the day, if a cop's like, let me see your ID,
Right.
I might just say like, can I ask why? And then just literally hand it to them. Like, what's the deal? And if they can't give me a deal, I'm like, all right.
If you're not doing it, look, if the police then say, because I have a reasonable suspicion, they don't even have to say this, but the standard is, do the police have a reasonable suspicion to approach you and detain you? Because asking you to stop there and produce an ID is a detention, and they have to be able to justify that. Now, you have to ask what the remedy is. Let's assume that the police have violated your constitutional rights, and we'll wrap it up with this. So in our scenario or your scenario, the police had no reason to ask you for that ID, or ask you to produce your ID, but you do anyway. And then as you produce your ID, out drops a couple crumbles of meth.
Oh, well, step up from my usual Mountain Dew, I guess.
Right. So it's not just Mountain Dew. You need a little extra oomph to get through the day. So you took your meth, and out it drops onto the sidewalk, and the police are like, oh, well, that's interesting. I'm going to seize that. Now you're under arrest. Please turn around, put your hands behind your back, and now you're charged with a felony drug possession charge. But the initial approach was unconstitutional. It violated Terry. They said, look, there's no reason to approach you. They just didn't like the way you looked. And lo and behold, out comes a crumble of crack cocaine or methamphetamines, and you can see how in New York this would happen. So they would say, look, you only targeted me because I'm black. You only did this. You only came up to me because I have a skin color or I'm a certain race or you don't like me. And the cops would have to justify that under the Fourth Amendment and say, look, I watched this guy. I watched Troy over there have a transaction with Bella about 10 minutes ago. So I had a reasonable and articulable suspicion that some criminal activity might be afoot. That'd be fine. But if the police can't articulate that, if there is no evidence of any sort of criminal behavior afoot or any facts that would lead to that, now they violate your Fourth Amendment, and what happens to the dope?
It can't be used in court, right?
Yeah, it's something called the exclusionary rule. And there's a bunch of cases all going back, but Wong's Son, which is an old, I think, Chinese.
Is that the fruit of the poisonous tree? Is that what
and then it's fruit of the poisonous tree, yeah. So that's sort of because it's not just the dope they found. Not just the dope they found, but anything that naturally flowed from the constitutional violation is all fruit of the poisonous tree, even if they could have found it later. But anyway, which is not necessarily true. There's something called the inevitable discovery rule, which we could go for days on this. But now the remedy then is you file a motion to challenge the admissibility evidence. We call it a suppression motion or a motion to suppress, and say, look, Officer Doolittle over there violated my client's constitutional rights, searched Troy without a warrant, and there was no reasonable suspicion. Therefore, it violated the Fourth Amendment under Terry versus Ohio. And I'm asking the court to throw the dope out. You're not allowed to use it at court. Now they can't prosecute you because they don't have the drugs to use and rely upon to prove the actual possession case. There's another remedy, and Scalia famously, or maybe not so famously before he died, was sort of hinting around at this. That look, the exclusionary rule is completely prophylactic. We invented it. The U.S. Supreme Court invented it. There is no basis for this in the Constitution. So if you pull out your little pocket Constitution and look in the Fourth Amendment, it just says they have to have a warrant to search you, basically. Mm. It doesn't say if they search you without a warrant, then they're not allowed to use the evidence against you in court. That was totally made up by the U.S. Supreme Court.
Just to deter the police. Yeah,
as a deterrent or consequence. The same is true with Miranda.
I'm not mad they made it up.
Well, some people, like, you wonder, and Scalia said, and I didn't agree with his logic. He's like, well, back in the day when police were corrupt, we needed this rule, but no longer is it necessary. I'm like, yeah, bullshit. It's like, no. But there is another way to redress it. It's called a civil rights act or a civil rights lawsuit. So you can sue the police in Section 1983 of the United States Code for civil rights violation. And I wondered, if the Supreme Court hadn't invented the exclusionary rule, would there have been some other mechanism that emerged that made that resulted in something similar or deterred the police just as much, if not more? And the answer is maybe. We'll never know.
Yeah.
But there has been some on that side of things, on the Scalia side of things, to get rid of the exclusionary rule because it's not constitutional. It doesn't have a basis it was made up. And, that's the same with Miranda warnings. There's nothing in the Fifth Amendment that says the police shall read this thing to you. But now it's Supreme Court constitutional law. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that was fun. But this tells you like what the police can't do to you. This is why I love criminal procedure, because what they can't do to you.
Yeah. I feel like I learned more in this 15 minutes than I did the first year we did this in legal drafting.
It's because you're not supposed to learn anything in law school. You're just supposed to learn that you don't know anything, and then you can go look it up.
I just felt like I couldn't get a straight answer in that class.
No.
Like I would ask questions and she was like, well, why do you think it's that way? I'm like, well, I'm asking. I don't know.
Right. So these little parts of your brain that have never moved are starting to slowly churn. Like, why do you think I have to think about this? And then you start to think, well, what would the reasoning be? And when you learn to connect those dots, it opens up a whole depth of understanding of the world that you would know. This is why the law school education is great. This is why Socratic method is awesome, because it creates links in your brain or channels of your brain that don't exist, and it teaches you how to think. So why would that be? And then you can start to reason through these things and make good arguments later that are yours alone. So, all right. Well, they don't teach you that in law school. I can tell you that. They make it hard on you in law school and make you learn it on your own, like we're doing right here at the table. This is lawyertalkpodcast.com, where you can suggest topics, you can ask questions, or you can just interact. I got a favor. If you guys are enjoying the content, why don't you subscribe? If you're on YouTube, subscribe. If you're in the podcast world, just hit the subscribe and download the content, share the content, comment on the content, like the content. And we're going to keep bringing it at you week in, week out. Lawyer Talk podcast off the record on the air, at least until now. Hey, Steve Palmer here from Lawyer Talk. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Check us out, all our social media. Like, share, interact, ask your own questions. We're here for you.